Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the regularly scheduled planning board meeting, November the 14th, 2022. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion to approve the agenda. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved, and we have approval of the minutes from our October the 10th meeting. Everybody's had a chance to take a look at those.
Indeed. I'll move to approve the minutes as submitted.
We have a motion to approve as submitted. Do we have a second? Second right here with Stuart, Mr. Glassman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. There is no old business. Under new business, we have an administrative review, preliminary site plan, and preliminary plat for the towns at Martha Kate. And Tyler is going to present that. I believe. There he is. There he is. Looking for him in the AV room.
Here, Kev. Okay, let's see. So, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board. The city has received applications for preliminary site plan review and major subdivision review. These are two separate applications, but I've combined them both into one presentation. However, you will make two separate motions when you get to that portion of the program. So, since administrative review projects do not come before planning board very often, I wanted to take this time to discuss the process and the planning board's role in this process for everyone in attendance. Both applications come before you today for an administrative review. Our ordinance defines administrative reviews as decisions made in the implementation, administration, or enforcement of the zoning and subdivision ordinances that involve the determination of facts and the application of objective standards set forth in the zoning and subdivision ordinance. Simply put, the planning board's administrative review of this project is to ensure that both the preliminary site plan and plat meet all applicable requirements for projects at this stage of the process. If the project meets all the applicable requirements, then the planning board must grant approval. The planning board can determine three possible outcomes for the applications. First being approved of the preliminary site plan and plat as presented. The second would be approval of the preliminary site plan and plat with conditions. This option is what staff has laid out in the provided motion and is staff's recommendation. Lastly, the planning board can vote to deny the application, but must provide reasoning for the denial and specifically state which section of the ordinance are not being met. Now, with that being discussed, we will go into why these projects are in front of you this afternoon for administrative review. Minor plan residential developments, or PRD, that consists of 9 units or more must be reviewed by the planning board. Unlike most developments that you review that require rezoning, a minor PRD is a by right permitted use in R20 and does not require rezoning. Approval of a preliminary site plan does not entitle the applicant to the issuance of a zoning compliance permit or final site plan approval. The developer will still be required to submit full construction drawings to staff for review, as well as any other required permits, which include but not limited to North Carolina driveway and encroachment permits, soil and erosion control permits, any utility approval, in this case, a possible floodplain development permit, stormwater permits, etc. The project also exceeds the thresholds to be reviewed as a major subdivision. Major subdivisions include all divisions of land involving 8 or more lots and/or involve the dedication of a new or change to existing streets. Approval of a required major subdivision shall not constitute the approval for recording a subdivision with registered deeds or approval for the conveyance of lots. The developer would have to first get all their final site plan approvals and then either construct or bond the infrastructure required in the subdivision ordinance, including but not limited to roads, sidewalks, water and sewer lines, etc., prior to the project going through the final plat stage. Hey, Lou, can you look on the screen? Thanks. So the location of the project is 153 Queen Street. The applicant is Rick Moore. He's also a property owner with Mitch Gaither. The existing zoning is R20 low density residential. That would be retained if approved today. The total acreage of the site is approximately 13.26 acres, and the proposed use is a minor planned residential development. The subject property is zoned R20 low density residential and is part of a transition from high density residential and industrial zoning to low density residential zoning that continues towards Berkeley Road. The property fronts on Queen Street, which is currently a gravel road that is maintained by NCDOT. The R20 zoning in this area appears to be exclusively made up by single family homes. The Oklawaha Greenway is on the opposite side of Mud Creek from this parcel. The developers have proposed a private trail that runs along the southwest side of their property that is planned to tie into the Oklawaha Greenway. The abutting parcels to the southwest are zoned I-1, and these parcels are made up by floodplain and floodway, and also some commercial uses. There are 2 planned residential development conditional zoning districts to the northeast. These include Providence Walk and Oklawaha Village. So these are some site photos of the site. The photo to the top left shows the existing conditions of Queen Street. As part of this development, the developer is required to upgrade Queen Street to just beyond their development entrance. This can be found on the preliminary site plan as far as how far they're actually going to be upgrading Queen Street to public street standard. The photo on the top right was taken in the floodplain portion of the property. This portion of the property slopes down towards Mud Creek. And as you can also see in the photo, there are high transmission power lines running across the property as well. The easements for these power lines are shown on the preliminary plan. The photo in the bottom left corner shows the approximate location for units 1 through 10. This area has a significant topographic change from the floodplain at Mud Creek to the higher slopes of Queen Street. Due to these topographic changes, the Board of Adjustment granted a setback variance for these units. And I'll go into that variance a little bit later on in the presentation and what it entailed. The photo in the bottom right shows a grove of large mature trees that are slated for removal. These trees will be removed to accommodate lots 12 through 26. A color-coded tree survey was provided in your packet. The green trees were trees that were slated to remain, and the red trees were slated for removal. I will mention that our ordinance does not currently require a basin. These need to be preserved on a particular development project. So we'll get into the preliminary site plan for this project. The site plan shows 26 detached townhome units. Units 1 through 10 will be approximately 884 square feet. Units 11 through 26 will be approximately 1,485 square feet. The proposed height of the units are 30 feet. They are currently proposing a density of 1.96 units an acre. By right, in a R20 minor PRD, they are allowed 2.5 units an acre, which would be 33 units on this site. So they're under what is permitted as a minor PRD. The property contains floodway, 100-year floodplain, and 500-year floodplain according to the 2007 FEMA maps. The property also has a wetland that was delineated by Atlas Environmental, which, let's see, that's the wetland right there, that kind of light gray area. The developer is proposing to fill 0.545 acres of the floodplain. By our ordinance, they are allowed to fill up to 0.70 acres of the floodplain. They are not proposing any structures to be placed in the floodplain or filled area. The development will be required to have a stormwater control measure. The stormwater control measure is primarily located within the portion of the 100-year floodplain, which is proposed to be filled. This is permitted by our ordinance, and that location was reviewed by our stormwater administrator and floodplain administrator, and they both confirmed that location meets city ordinances, and that's the location that I'm speaking on. The stream buffer is enacted. They are showing a walking trail outside of that stream buffer and transition areas. They're not getting into those. The steepest portion of the slope is 14.3%. All internal streets to the site, including the alley, will be built to public street standards and dedicated to the city. NCDOT has requested that the developer dedicate an additional right-of-way in order to accommodate potential upgrades to Queen Street in the future. But that is outside of this process. PRD requires that one parking space per 1 and 2 bedrooms. They're meeting all the parking space requirements with a garage and a driveway parking area. They are providing sidewalks along all internal streets. It will be served by city water and sewer, and due to the project getting sewer, they will have to go through the annexation process. So the preliminary site plan accompanying this petition does meet standards established by the zoning ordinance for planned residential developments and site plan review, with the following exceptions. The development is required to have a 12 by 40 loading / unloading space, which staff shown that could potentially be where the cluster mailbox is. This has been made a condition of the approval, so it is in your motion as a condition, but the final design can be addressed during final site plan review and can be worked out with staff. Sidewalks are required along the property frontage to the southeast on North Main Street towards the bridge. The applicant is advised that sidewalks in this area cannot be accomplished due to existing North Carolina DOT guardrails. City staff would prefer that there be sidewalks provided in this area, and we could work with NCDOT during final site plan and possibly reconfiguring the guardrail in front of the sidewalk. However, the applicant does have the ability to either request to build the same length of sidewalk off-site or request a fee in lieu, both of which would be approved by the city manager, and all of which can be finalized in the design phase of the final site plan. So those do not have to be addressed or shown on the plan right now. They can be made a condition and addressed at final site plan. Also, the Development Review Committee reviewed the site plan, and no other department had any preliminary site plan comments for this project. On the screen is a preliminary plat that was provided with the application. The preliminary plat does meet the requirements set by the subdivision ordinance. The Development Review Committee reviewed the plat as well, and no other department had any preliminary plat comments. The preliminary plat accompanying this petition, like I mentioned, meets the requirements of major subdivisions in our subdivision ordinance. However, there are a couple notes worth mentioning. There are easements shown on the plat in order to conform with the requirements of major subdivisions and the preliminary plat stage. However, the easements on the plat are not finalized and have not been reviewed by the city's engineering, water and sewer, or legal departments. The city can require other easements configurations than what is shown on the preliminary plat. The finalized easements will be recorded on a separate easement plat, and that easement plat will be reviewed by all those 3 departments that I mentioned earlier. The cluster mailbox currently does not show any of the parking, does not currently show any parking. Our ordinance states that no parking spaces are provided, and pedestrian infrastructure must be present to allow residents to walk and get their mail. Sidewalks are provided throughout the development, so no parking at the cluster mailbox is required. I mean, they could be approved under the current configuration. However, final design could include the provision of parking spaces at the final site plan, which would be staff's preference. As I mentioned earlier, there was a variance granted for this project on October 11th, 2022. The Board of Adjustment granted this development a variance from the requirement that dwellings and accessory structures abutting a street intended to serve more than 32 dwelling units or intended to be dedicated as a public street must be set back a minimum of 35 feet from the center line of such street. Due to the floodplain and topographic constraints of this site, the Board of Adjustment granted this variance, which allowed a 27-foot setback from the center line for units 1 through 10 instead of the required 35. The variance is shown on the preliminary site plan. As you will see on the map on the screen, the lower portion of the property is covered in floodplain. And as the property moves towards Queen Street, it does go up a slope. The development is shown on the plan, puts homes 1 through 10 between the floodplain and the steeper slopes at Queen Street. By allowing the reduction in the required setback, the development does not include filling the floodplain for structures and does not propose any structures within the floodplain. And like I mentioned, they are proposing to fill a portion of it for their stormwater control measure. Lastly, having established compliance with the zoning and subdivision ordinance, staff recommends that the planning board approve the preliminary site plan and preliminary subdivision plat for Towns at Martha Kate with the suggested conditions included in the recommended motions and with the recognition that all final site plan requirements established by the zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance will be met prior to the issuance of a zoning compliance permit. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. And I've also included both the approval and denial motions at the end of my presentation, if y'all need those.
Thank you, Tyler. Does anybody on the board have any questions for staff? Go ahead, John.
I'm a little confused about why this went to the Board of Adjustment first. Does this board have the authority to grant setback variances?
This board does not have the, you cannot grant a variance from the ordinance.
Okay, so has that ever occurred in the past?
That y'all have granted a setback variance? No, state law, I don't believe allows you to. You can place conditions, kind of what is on the ordinance to make the site plan compliant, but I don't believe that you all could have the ability to relax requirements.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Talk about, if you don't mind, the process. So we're used to a very different process. This particular presentation, this process that we're going through here right now is nothing more than making sure that there's compliance.
Correct.
With a preliminary site plan.
Correct. So normally,
My question relates more back to like, was there a neighborhood compatibility meeting? How do the neighbors feel about this? What lead us up to where we got to today?
yeah. So I'll kind of start what y'all are more familiar with, and then I'll work into what this process is.
Sure, thank you.
So the planning board normally deals with legislative hearings. And legislative hearings are usually tied to rezonings, and that kind of where a whole host of different thoughts and input and stuff like that is brought in, and it's part of the process basically. Where administrative kind of differs from that, you're basically acting as an extension of the planning department right now. Where the planning department, we review by right developments on a daily basis. And as long as they meet the ordinance, then they are able to submit final site plans, get their zoning permit. But at a certain threshold, as far as transparency is concerned, we ask the planning board to review projects that are over 20,000 square feet for commercial, minor plan residential developments that are over 9 units, just to add another level of transparency for these administrative reviews, where you are doing basically the job of a planner. You're looking at what's being proposed and making sure, hey, this does meet the ordinance or it doesn't meet the ordinance, or it can meet the ordinance if it has this piece. So you are basically fact finders in this scenario. You are looking at the facts. Does it meet the ordinance? If it does meet the ordinance, then they get a permit. If it doesn't meet the ordinance, you have to state what it doesn't meet, and then you could potentially deny it. This is kind of more on the lines of what used to be was a special use permit process, where that one's a little bit different because it was quasi judicial, but basically the nuts and bolts, if you met the ordinance, you got your special use permit. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it, where legislative goes to neighborhood compatibility meetings, the tree board for conditional zoning districts, planning board for a recommendation, and then city council for an ultimate decision. You all would be making the ultimate decision today on the preliminary plan. there's not really a step after this because the final site plan will be reviewed by staff as well as the final plat.
Okay, and at final site plan, that's when all the details are hammered out as far as the stormwater, engineered stormwater, whether there's parking at the cluster mailboxes, whether a homeowners association has been established, those types of things.
Correct. So they'll have to submit permits like any other projects. They will have to do their stormwater permits, which will go to our stormwater division within the city, and they'll review the stormwater plan to make sure that it meets those city requirements. And that's a part of the final site plan or review. Same for utility plans, water and sewer plans. They'll have to submit those to the city to make sure, hey, these meet our current city standards. Same way with NCDOT. NCDOT will have to inspect all the driveway permits, any encroachments into the side or into the right of way, like if they're putting in a sidewalk and DOT's right of way, NCDOT has to approve that. Our public works department will have to look at the cross sections for the roads and inspect those and make sure that they're applicable and they're up to standards for roads in the city. Soil and erosion control, anything with grading and that will have to go through the county and be approved as part of the final site plan review process. The idea and the ordinance for preliminary site plan review, you may be asking why do we have this step? So the idea in ordinance and kind of how the ordinance spells it out is this step is kind of meant to allow by right projects that are larger some guarantees before they spend the money on final utility plans, final stormwater plans, so they can get some type of guarantee that this project does meet the ordinance without having to put out all that expense on the front end. Because I mean, I'm sure that the project is somewhat expensive when you get into the final details, but by allowing them to come through this process with a preliminary site plan, it's a little bit of a cheaper option while still being transparent and open with the citizens to allow them to see what's being proposed. And that's only for this type of by right developments.
So no neighborhood compatibility because it's being developed the way it's zoned currently.
Correct. There is no zoning change.
Okay. What about, so there were some signs put out on North Main Street about this meeting in particular.
Correct.
Has there been any feedback from local residents to the city planning, to the city at all?
We have not received any pre-submitted comments for this project. Yeah, and good point. We do send out letters for both the subdivision and the preliminary site plan. And we also posted 2 signs for both of those, all of which are regulated either by general statutes in North Carolina or our local codes. And we have to follow those standards for what's required for that noticing.
Any other questions for staff? I have one more, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So normally this board hears what the tree board had to say about a project of this nature.
Yes.
Was the tree board involved? Because I walked the site today and there's some very majestic, older, mature trees on the property.
Yeah, you are correct. So to answer your question in short, no, the tree board did not review this project just because they're not in our ordinance doesn't spell out their role in this process. If they did have a role, much like CZDs, our ordinance does spell out their role in reviewing conditional zoning district petitions. However, for administrative reviews such as this, they currently do not have that role specified. So they did not review this project.
Okay.
Will they eventually?
They will not.
Why?
It's a by right.
Yeah, it's a by right development. I think the idea potentially instead of maybe having the tree board review all administrative projects, maybe the idea would be to change the ordinance so that those requirements are already in place, kind of what the tree board is already looking for, and just have those in the development. So any by right development would have to follow those standards instead of having to go to a separate board to get those standards enacted.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions for staff? All right. Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks.
At this point, if the developer is in the room, do you have any comments, Mr. Moore? Okay. Does anybody on this board have any questions for the developer? I guess I'll do real quickly. I noticed on the site plan that a good portion of that stormwater area is perhaps where some of those trees are. Do you know for a fact if any of those big oak trees are going to be saved? Okay. It's not, okay. I couldn't tell from the site plan, but so you don't feel like any of those big trees will be able to be saved?
At this point, we're gonna save as many as we can.
Okay.
Can't determine until we get everything like that.
Understood. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Normally, we don't take public input for these types of things, but if there's anybody in the room that from the public that wanted to speak, we will take comments. However, understand that this is not a legislative type review. Your comments should pertain to whether or not this is in compliance or not. But feel free to come on up, give us your name. You can say whatever you want, but there's nothing we can do unless it doesn't comply. Let me put it that way.
Well, I'm not here to, and as now I now understand, I'm not here at the proper place or time, so I apologize for that. I'm not concerned about the presence or.
Sorry, sir. Can you just give your name and
Oh,
address?
sorry. I'm Justice Mullen. I live across the street on Ocklawaha Drive. I'm not concerned about the presence or lack thereof of the apartment complex. I think it'll be nice to have more neighbors. My one concern, and I don't know if we could pull the map back up of the big overview. It kind of where Queen Street intersects with North Main Street. It kind of goes into a blind turn right there. And because, because the North Main Street has that section that kind of goes out of Hendersonville and just has a green light, people come in through there at about 45 and they'll run around the corner sometimes at about 45. Speed limit's 35, but they do it anyways. And so my concern is that with increased density in this area, it might cause some accidents. So I just wanted to make you aware of that and maybe consider like a four-way stop or something at that particular intersection.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that too, because when I walked the site today, as I came out to North Main Street, I noticed where they got that nice walk bridge across Mud Creek connecting you to the Ocklawaha Trail. There's going to be a lot of pedestrian traffic, I feel like. But on the site plan, it shows a crosswalk.
It does not currently show a crosswalk.
It doesn't go back to the, I thought it did. I thought I saw right there.
Does it?
Oh, proposed.
Yeah,
I can't.
yeah, so it does, well, I guess, yeah, so it does show a proposed stop or crosswalk. So that would have to be approved and reviewed by NCDOT. They've really got the main say in that.
Right.
And so, yeah, they would have to review that as far as their standards and.
Because if I lived in that neighborhood and I wanted to walk on the Ocklawaha, I would cross North Main, take that sidewalk and cross that bridge, I assume. You mentioned that there might be a trail on your property too along Mud Creek with access to the Ocklawaha or no? Okay. Yeah, so pedestrian crosswalk there, even with some of those little flashing lights that you can mash a button, maybe, you know, because it isn't a curve. That would make sense. Could that be a condition of the?
So any improvement in the roadway would have to be approved by NCDOT. And I know that they had concerns about a crosswalk at that location, but we've only had preliminary conversations about it because of the site distance issues that you all are kind of talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
So they had concerns about putting a crosswalk.
Right. They had concerns about doing that at that location. But we've only had preliminary conversations
Is
with
there
them
room to
about
go
that.
Like under the overpass?
I do not know the answer to that.
Yeah. Where you see if you can walk under the. Underneath and then back up to that bridge. Okay. All right, well, that will come, I guess, with final site plans.
Yeah, correct, because that would involve us having more detailed conversations with NCDOT on what they will and will not allow.
Okay.
If we pass this, do we attach recommendations? Or we just say yay or nay?
I don't know, Lou, what do you think?
There's no legal condition as to the, the crosswalk. So the standard of the zoning ordinance is that the sidewalk has to be installed. The reason I think some of these things are being discussed is that they are having a conversation or have had the beginnings of a conversation with staff about, we don't think we can do a sidewalk along North Main, and is there value in extending a sidewalk to the bridge crossing Mud Creek? And there is the option, of course, for them to request a fee in lieu should they find that there are components of the site plan or components of the site that don't facilitate a sidewalk. At the end of the day, what I could say is that you all could give staff some of your thoughts and feedback. The legal requirement or the standard that we have is the sidewalk requirement, and then the fee in lieu process is the one they have. We certainly could use your feedback in determining how to proceed in that fee in lieu assessment.
It couldn't be a condition.
No, it can't be a condition of the approval because there's no ordinance standard that would require, a crosswalk or for the trail to go under the bridge per se.
Jim, can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
Tyler, walk me through just how your brain would work on this.
Oh, Lord.
The only thing that bothers me about this, quite candidly, is the question of parking at the cluster mailboxes versus not requiring sidewalks. Now, in all honesty, if I lived in Unit 1, I would have no qualms about walking down to where the clusters are. But you all know I'm not normal. As a planner, would you have concerns about people pulling in, parking illegally at the cluster mailboxes to get their mail and causing accidents? Just 2 or 3 cars
Yeah. So I
gathering
think-
there at mail drop off time.
Yeah, so I think potentially, I think that is a concern. The way the ordinance is written, they currently meet it as far as providing that pedestrian infrastructure. But I think from a planning and maybe a more practical standpoint, I think providing parking spaces in that area would be a potential good thing. As I mentioned in the staff report as well. Yeah, I think staff will continue to try to advocate for that because we do feel that would be necessary to keep people from parking in no parking areas on a public street.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll entertain a motion. Someone has one?
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
I move that.
Hey, Jim, I'm sorry. Ken Fitch has raised his hand online. I don't know if you want to give
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
him an opportunity to speak.
Ken.
And it looks like Lynn has too, so.
Okay.
Ken, you-
Yes, Ken Fitch, 1046 Patton Street. This project, located as it is off North Main Street and adjacent to the Mud Creek floodplain and the Oklawaha Greenway, which are 2 features of some defining importance to the city, the project has generated public awareness. And and there's discussion, so there are questions that are out there. And I realize that this process doesn't allow for action on some of this, but it may be in the category of feedback and suggestions that may flow into the final site plan or the review process going forward. So in that spirit, I'm raising certain questions. Now, we're becoming aware of the increase of flood events that exceed previous limits, so that the positioning of units of this density does not escape notice. So the question would be, how does this project function in the event of more severe flood events, say greater than a 100-year flood event? And related to that, we hear about the fill that's going to be added, but what is the impact on the floodplain, if any, if there's a severe flood event? So this is something in terms of like how does this function given what we experience when we have a heavy rain here? As has been discussed, a distinguished natural feature of the site is the grove of mature trees. So a question would come up is, would any replacement tree plantings be considered? Because the development does stand to alter the existing vistas. So what goes forward in the plan, I think, is something of interest, both to neighbors, but also to the larger community. The project includes a parcel across North Main Street to the south. And what is the plan for that parcel? I mean, there's no units there, but that's there. And what is the concept for that parcel? It appears that the project has an interior road that's parallel to Queen Street. So the question is, what's the character of that interface with Queen Street along that section? Is that is it going to be buffering? What's happening there? Because I know the neighbors there are concerned of what's going to happen because they've got this one lane road, and how does this project affect that? And as it was just brought up, the project cites effectively 2 parking spaces per unit. But like, how would any additional parking for visitors or deliveries be accommodated within the project? I mean, that's an issue in terms of the mailboxes, but in other issues, if you have other vehicles in this project, then how does the flow, how is that accomplished? Because I think that we're concerned, you want all the parking contained within this development. Now, there's also the mention of the construction of a trail in the floodplain. And so the question is, what's the method of construction for that? Because you're in a floodway. And as mentioned, what's the mode of connection to the greenway? Because if this is a private trail, you've got that issue to consider, and how does that negotiate it? And the other issue that you have raised already, that North Main Street is already stressed with traffic and access, and there will be additional traffic from the proposed and developments and those underway. So the intersection will have an increased hazard because there's going to be increased traffic. So safety measures such as you have been suggesting, they are something that should have some consideration. There's also, I mean, there's a practical question, because constructing this project with all those trucks coming in, who's going to be responsible for what happens to that entry section of Queen Street? Already you can see the tire tracks and everything else going on the sides. So what's going to happen? Because this route is also accessible for the neighborhoods beyond, and that's so delineation of who's going to be responsible for what happens there, I think it's important. And there just a little note on one of the plans that says this is in the Valley Hill Fire District, but would this not be served by Hendersonville Fire Department? As I said, there are many questions here, and as you're raising, but hopefully the final site plan would address some of these issues, because there are serious things to consider here. And again, this is a very sensitive area because of the greenway and the floodway, and this is something that has great public attention. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fitch. Will, do we have somebody else with their hand raised?
Lynn, you've been asked to unmute.
I just will mention that, public input is not required, but we allowed it today because we had someone in the room that wanted to speak. But anything we hear should pertain to whether this is in compliance or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Williams, Chadwick Avenue, thank you for your time. I do understand it's about compliance, and that is my concern about the section that says proposed fill within a 100-year flood zone of approximately half an acre. I believe, the flood zone ordinance clearly says to not build in the 100-year flood zone, and that's exactly what this is doing. So I would urge for reconsideration. And my second concern is, protection of this delineated wetlands that they're going to have on the property as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So can we just talk real briefly then about the filling of the wetlands? Is that where the road is going to cross that little gray area, Tyler?
I think it was where the catchment.
Was it?
So the filling of the wetlands, you said there's like 4/10 of an acre.
So the field is actually,
It's where the stormwater area
It's where
is,
the stormwater is.
not where the road is crossing that grade.
correct. So the field to the floodplain is occurring right there.
Okay, and that is allowed up to.
Yes,
In other words, they're filling in less than what would be allowed.
Around 0.75.
yeah, I can read out the ordinance if you'd like from.
No, that's all right. As
Okay.
long as you're telling me it's in compliance, right?
Correct.
And then, what about replacement of trees? Is there any requirement there?
So for this type of development, planned residential development does not require any type of street tree or anything of that nature. So the only time you would really get into requiring trees or landscaping would be if you had vehicular use areas such as like parking lots, which they
Buffering.
currently do not have. So as it is, there would not be really any required landscaping. However, that does not stop them from planting landscaping or going above and beyond, which we would greatly appreciate and welcome. But the way the ordinance is currently written, there's really nothing that we could require unless they did do cluster mailbox parking that exceeded 6 spots, and then that kind of starts triggering special vehicular use landscaping.
And we did hear from the developer that they're going to save as many trees as possible. Okay. Anybody else with their hand raised or, okay. We started a
I would,
motion.
I'm gonna create a motion to approve. So I move that the planning board grant preliminary site plan approval based on the requirements of the city of Hendersonville zoning ordinance with primary consideration of sections 5-14 planned residential development and 7-3-3 review of preliminary site plans for the towns of Martha Kate project subject to the following conditions. Development shall provide a 12 by 40 loading, unloading space for the development at the location approved by staff. And the second, sidewalks or fee in lieu of sidewalks shall be provided along the property frontage to the southwest of Queen Street on North Main Street.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
I have one final question.
Sure.
Who is Martha Kate?
Oh, no.
Well, we still have another motion.
You need to do this second motion too.
Sorry to
Yep.
jump in then.
That's right.
We'll defer my
We'll
question.
find out who Martha Kate is in a moment.
I can do the second one. I move that the planning board grant preliminary plat approval based on the requirements of the city of Hendersonville subdivision ordinance with primary consideration of section 2.04H major subdivision for the towns at Martha Kate project, subject to the following condition. The configuration of utility easements is subject to change. Final configuration will be reviewed and approved by city staff prior to recordation of the final plat.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously as well. Okay, now we can find out who Martha Kate is.
Try to find what it is, property design, so her and her husband own it, Martha Caitlin, yes. So we're naming it after her.
Okay, Thank you. Just curious.
Was there a house sitting up there? in that hill? Okay. It looked like there had been. All right, next item on the agenda is the comprehensive plan update.
So this is quick, but council did approve the recommendation for Bolton Bank, Colt Geneston Stone. We've reached out to the primary contractor, basically the lead designer on the project manager, to initiate the contract negotiation. We'll be working on that probably over the next 15 to 20 days. Hope to have that wrapped up and in front of council sooner rather than later. They'll approve a final contract. And we'll talk with you all about what that results in, but we are looking forward to moving that forward and hope to really start zeroing in on some dates for initial public meetings, outreach, stakeholder outreach, and that sort of thing as we move into 23. So any questions about any of that or the work we've been doing on that one? So far, so good. Council was appreciative of all the work the planning board put in on that, and I think enjoyed having something that was complete when it got to them. They liked having something non-controversial from the planning board to work through. So yeah, looking forward to continuing that process. Okay, that was it.
Then if we could just jump back to old business, I guess it would be last month, we requested a change in our procedures for this board, which would allow for meeting of the subcommittees via digital means.
Correct. And that actually made its way to city council and they passed an ordinance at their last meeting, which is referenced here. Chapter 2, Article 5. It was on the consent agenda. They didn't really discuss it, but with the passing of that ordinance by city council, it put in our code of ordinances the ability and the structure for how electronic or virtual meetings can be held. And so the city attorney then sent me her thoughts on how that can be reflected into the planning board's rules of procedure, to then outline how these virtual meetings can be conducted. So as you all know, over the last few months, we've been having, after the emergency order was stopped, we're having to have in-person meetings. By adopting this would allow us to go back to sending a Zoom link out. If you want to come to our office and meet with us, you're welcome to do that. We do have to have a physical location for the meetings. We have to notice the meetings and all the same stuff. But if it's more convenient for you to log into Zoom and join us that way, then you're going to be welcome to do that as well. So.
Okay, so we don't have to change our procedures.
Well, I think it would be advised that we do, that the planning board's rules of procedure reflect, you could make reference to the city's code of ordinances only, or as was shown on the screen here, you could make reference to the city's code of ordinances and then specifically outline how that is going to be conducted. She gave us either option. In this case, I put it in the rules of procedure outlined. So you could do it either way. But you're welcome to make a motion tonight to amend the rules of procedure, referencing Chapter 2, Article 5 of the City of Hendersonville Code of Ordinances, period, or with the rest of the language that's shown in green there.
Okay, well, if Chapter 3, Article 5 changes in the future and we reference it, then we'd be fine with the changes. But if otherwise, are we bound to what's written there?
That would be one way of it. Chapter 2, Article 5 has more information than just that. This is the information specific to subcommittees.
Okay.
So the rationale that you just pointed out is a reason that if that structure gets amended at some point, then you would have to come back and amend it in here as well. So there's two steps to that. If you just make reference to Article 2, Chapter 2, Article 5, and it changes, then the rules of procedure, essentially change with it. So.
What are the thoughts?
I'd be inclined to do it just by reference. if the city's going to change their macro approach.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Agree with that.
Okay, so we need a motion then?
A motion to amend the rules of procedure by, referencing chapter 2, article 5, the city of Hendersonville Code of Ordinances as it pertains to conducting virtual meetings for subcommittees. Or something to that effect.
I want to bring up one other item.
Go ahead. This is not pertaining to this.
Yeah, it's about section 4 in the rules.
Okay,
I just want to ask a question about
Sure.
section 4, if you're done with that one.
no, go ahead.
It says in section 4, a majority of members shall constitute a quorum. I think that means majority of the 10 members, regardless of whether 8 members signed at that time. So it's not members present at a meeting. It's always going to be up to 10, whether there are really 10 members or not. Is that correct?
My understanding is that the rules of small government procedure, whatever that book is appointed members. So if there are vacancies, there's 10 slots.
Right.
There's only 7 appointed. The majority is 4.
Okay.
Does that make-
the 7, it's however have been appointed, whether they show up or not.
So if if it included the word appointed, it would be accurate.
As long as that's clear.
Right, because otherwise you could get in a pickle.
Happens in the Board of Adjustment a lot.
Okay,
Yeah, I would argue that that could be more clear in that rules of procedure, but we also do reference this other set, little booklet from the School of Government that adds clarity. So we reference that book a lot when we're trying to interpret.
I'm fine then.
okay, it sounds like this board favors just referencing, is it chapter 2, article 5?
That's correct.
Okay. Do we have a motion to that effect?
I move to adopt what he said before. Because I think they would.
Well said.
That will work.
Somebody taking minutes?
Yes, we're recording.
Okay, do we have a second? Do we have a second to reference the city's chapter 2, article 5? Any discussion?
Commissioner Hanley seconds.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Wow, 3 unanimous decisions
Wow.
in one night.
You're a
Right.
genius.
Before you call the meeting,
I actually have one more item as
you
well.
have something?
Okay, do you want to give the floor to
Sure.
this gentleman here to bring up, I guess, a proposal of sorts? Or to address them about some concerns? This will just be open public comment. I don't know if you did that at the beginning of the
We
meeting.
didn't do open public comment. No.
And then staff
Start by-
has one more discussion item as well.
Okay.
That I'm
right.
sorry to throw on you.
Go ahead, so you have the floor. Give us your name and address.
Good afternoon. My name is Craig Franks, 1033 Justice Street. And I see some familiar faces here. Most of you may know me as Director of Facility Planning at Pardee Hospital, but I'm not here in that capacity. My sister Andrea Strauss and I are here regarding a proposed staff adjustment to the R15 medium density residential description of the types of housing that can be included in that zoning. Currently, it reads single family residence or dual family residence. And we own a property at 1033 Justice Street. It's a triplex. And we were in the process of selling it. And the prospective buyer was unable to purchase it because as their lender drilled down on the zoning, it only read for single residence and dual residence. And so we're stuck with a property that we essentially cannot sell until that language is included. There's more detail to that in terms of lot size and everything, but if that was being proposed in this meeting, we wanted to voice our support for that. We believe the inclusion of multifamily in the zoning district would also support the city's initiative for a higher density walkable downtown. The 2 tenants in the triplex currently don't have cars, but they're able to enjoy living downtown because they can walk to the grocery store, drugstore, bus route, and other amenities adjacent to this section of Justice Street. Current zoning would require that this building be rebuilt as a single-family residence were it to burn or otherwise be destroyed. This would decrease housing density and require 2 current city residents to seek living arrangements elsewhere. So for these reasons, we're in favor of the text change to include multifamily. Thank you.
Are you not grandfathered in, from?
I just said that should be-
For now.
So his property is non-conforming and we discussed it at length that I'm not a lender, so I couldn't really answer that question as to whether, you just needed a cash buyer to be able to sell a non-conforming property. That would be news to me, but that may be the case.
Could it be deemed legal, non-compliant?
It is legal non-conforming now. Correct.
So I'll just jump in real quick. I think the issue, as I understood it, was that the lender was issuing on a, 3-bedroom home and the income associated with it. And that's how they were making those numbers work. And a 3-bedroom or a 3-unit complex, a triplex, could not be rebuilt if it were damaged beyond 50% under our zoning code. So it's legally established. We're not going to go in there and make it go away, but if it burns down, it can't be rebuilt under the current zoning. So it could only be done as a duplex, which apparently was an issue for the lender.
Couldn't be a duplex either because it doesn't have enough minimum.
Oh, it didn't have enough square
A little
footage
more
on the lot.
context. Originally, the MIC that we've talked about, the changes to MIC to permit multifamily, to change some of the setbacks that we've been working on were lined up to potentially come back to the planning board this evening. We pulled that from the agenda to have further discussion and look at really the design standards aspect of that. We took a stab at it. We worked on design standards for that district and felt that it needed further discussion. Excuse me. And so in this case, the particular property in question is zoned R15. Staff looked at this, rezoning that particular property would make it isolated around with R15 on either side of it. If R6, which is across the street, came across the street, it still would not be a zoning district that would bring it into compliance. Still only allow single family and 2-family. And so the only path forward besides maybe doing either changing R15 significantly or taking a larger area, taking maybe, the rest of the block and rezoning that entire block to some appropriate zoning district, which there are very few that would actually work. We don't have a multifamily zoning district per se. It's really location based. CMU, CHMU, those are all, surrounding downtown or out by Upward Road or Greenville Highway, things like that. So this particular area, the zoning district that allows for more intensity is MIC. Currently doesn't allow multifamily, but that question or that proposal was going to be brought to the planning board and will be at some point. So the idea was that potentially if that zoning text amendment was supported, then and approved, then this property could be a potential candidate for rezoning to MIC. And so that's a little more context, I think, for the advocacy you've heard tonight for the MIC. We haven't spoken in a few weeks. He didn't realize that item was not still on the agenda. So I'll leave it at that for your consideration next time we bring up the MIC. And the rest of the comments, I think, are pertain to a lot of things related to housing and where our density should be and walkability and all those great points that were made. So the other item, any questions on that? The other item.
So we're not being asked for action.
No, that was, I think what I heard was more of a request to support that idea of density within our urban areas.
Okay, thank you.
Whatever form that looks like in the future. Can you click back on the screen real quick? So the next item, we haven't talked about this, but I wanted to bring this up. Staff has been discussing this. Wanted to get your thoughts quickly, briefly on the idea of shifting our planning board meetings from Mondays to Thursdays. Essentially, right now, we're at the second Monday of each month. How that second Monday relates to city council is inconsistent. The idea of moving it to a Thursday, same time, 4 o'clock. This is the proposal. Could be some other time or day. The idea behind that would always follow city council. It would always be 1 week after city council. So city council meets on the first Thursday of each month. Planning board would meet on the second Thursday of each month. And so there would be some consistency. They would add some separation. Very often staff, is here on Thursday evening. We're, have, whatever it is, a 12-hour day, come in on Friday, and we're either the next Monday after that Friday is packet deadline, or it's planning board. And so we're either kind of scrambling towards a deadline on Friday and Monday, or we are having evening meetings pretty close in close proximity to one another. So adding some separation for those deadlines, having consistent deadlines would be helpful. And then shifting it away from a Monday, also from a staff perspective, again, would allow us to kind of focus. We start on Monday. We know it's planning board week. We are working that week towards that evening meeting with the planning board. And so certainly would help with focus coming in and starting the planning board week and working towards that. So staff has some opinions on it, and we see some benefits to us, but I really have no idea how it would impact the board. And so before this discussion goes any further and we run it by the city manager or city council, we want to get, your thoughts first and just bat it around a little bit and then go from there.
Well, what's it worth to you?
Am I laying it on that thick?
I think it makes sense. In other words, getting your packets prepared for this meeting, it would give, and then, applicants too, give them 3 more days, get all the information you've requested to them. There's no need to have it on that Monday and push to have those packets ready by the previous Monday. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
up for it.
We got to run up the chain too. I like that enthusiasm.
And this would take.
Yeah, if there's
effect
general
when we set-
consensus and no
Let me ask you a
opposition.
question. Does anybody have a big conflict with Thursday evening?
Unless the Buffalo Bills are playing that night.
Can you
Well, there is
not,
Thursday night football.
it's only
Thursday night football.
only the second Thursday. Can you not, make sure?
Second Thursday of each month.
Right. So we looked at, there's no other,
From
a logistical standpoint, there's no other recurring meetings, no other city business happening. Rhythm and Brews is on the 3rd Thursday. We're not, we don't really foresee it running up against anything. The meetings do start at 4 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock now. On average, we're getting out of here at, probably later we should be.
Don't
but-
say it out loud.
Yeah.
It is Thursday evening, but we should be getting out of here with enough time to still retain some evening on those Thursdays.
Well, it sounds like there is no major conflict here, and I see a lot of heads nodding, so.
Great.
Do we need a
Thank you for
motion
that
or
time.
something, or we just?
We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
My idea right now is to do if this works out, would be to do a special called meeting for a month or 2 and see how we like it, see how it works out deadline wise for staff. Before committing to it permanently or formally, we would try it out a couple months. If there's something wrong with it, we don't like it, then at least we haven't officially changed it. Whether that idea actually will work with our annual adoption of the schedule, we're not sure yet, but we'll come back to you if further action is needed. I think it's basically a city council decision, but not on Church Street though. Okay, we'll let you know.
Yeah, we'll run it up. If you all would like to make a motion, we'll take that but I'm also comfortable with the general consensus that's been shared.
Yeah, I think the feedback and the direction we're giving you is probably.
Okay. And
pretty strong.
if something comes up, you can email me your thoughts
Okay,
if they're contrary to what I'm hearing tonight too.
sounds good.
Thank you.
To adjourn.
So moved.
There we go. We're out of here. Thank you.